What if Jonah and Elise had arrived a little earlier? Or maybe if they had decided to delay their entrance by just half an hour. It's hard not to imagine how drastically different everything might have turned out. Yet, here I was, watching a man like a hawk from across the room, my stomach churning with equal parts anger and purpose. Elliot, the man at the center of my attention, moved through the crowd with an unsettling grace. His demeanor was calculated, his eyes sharp and observant, scanning the room as if he were a predator selecting his prey. His body language was fluid, almost magnetic, as though he knew how to manipulate the atmosphere around him. My pulse quickened as I watched him focus on a couple seated a few tables away. The man was obliviously chatting, laughing over his drink, while the woman occasionally glanced around nervously, playing with the edge of her napkin. I already knew how this would play out if I didn't intervene. I didn't need confirmation to know what Elliot was planning. His type was easy to spot once you had the misfortune of falling victim to them. Months ago, he'd torn my life apart, reducing everything I held dear to ashes. Tonight wasn't about revenge. It was about closure, justice, prevention, maybe all three. Sliding through the crowd, I matched his movements, careful to stay just outside his periphery. My heart raced as the memories came flooding back, of how he'd lured my wife away from me, of the humiliation I'd felt in front of my children. The devastation that followed had been a slow poison, eroding my family and everything I had worked for. I tightened my fists, willing the memories to fuel my resolve. Tonight, Elliot wouldn't ruin another family. "Hey," I said sharply, stepping directly into his path. My voice was calm, but carried an undertone that I knew he couldn't ignore. Elliot paused, his confident smirk faltering as he looked at me. For a moment, I wondered if he recognized me. But no, I was just another faceless casualty to him, a statistic in his game. "Do I know you?" he asked, his voice dripping with false politeness. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You don't remember me, do you?" "Of course, why would you? People like you don't bother remembering the damage you cause." His confusion turned to discomfort, and for the first time, I saw a crack in his composed facade. He didn't respond, so I pressed on. 8 months ago, a party like this, you danced with my wife. Told her she deserved better than a boring husband. Does that jog your memory?" The surrounding tables began to quiet down as heads turned toward us. Elliot's eyes darted nervously around the room, his mask of confidence slipping further. "Look, I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to me." My voice rose, and I stepped closer, forcing him to look me in the eye. "You knew she was married. You didn't care. You never care, do you? All you see are opportunities." The room had gone almost completely silent now, with whispers spreading like wildfire. People were craning their necks to catch a glimpse of the unfolding drama. I could feel the weight of their stares, but it only fueled my determination. Elliot tried to step back, but I matched his movement, keeping the distance between us uncomfortably close. "You're going to listen to me," I said, my voice low but firm. "For once, you're going to hear what it's like on the other side of your little games." Elliot raised his hands, palms out, as if to calm me. "Look, man, I'm sorry if something happened." "Don't," I snapped, cutting him off. "Don't you dare apologize to me like it means anything. Do you even understand what you've done? Do you know what it's like to tell your kids their mom's not coming home because someone like you tore their family apart?" A murmur rippled through the crowd. Elliot's expression was carefully neutral now, but I could see the discomfort in his eyes. He wasn't used to being confronted like this, especially not in public. For a moment, I thought he might lash out or try to turn the situation around, but he stayed quiet. I glanced at my watch, calculating how much time I had left. Everything had to go according to plan. The police were already on their way, and I needed to make sure Elliot didn't slip away before they arrived. Reaching into my jacket, I pulled out the object that had been weighing on me all evening, a Glock 19. A collective gasp spread through the room, and several people scrambled to back away. Elliot froze, his eyes widening as he stared at the gun. For the first time, I saw real fear in his expression. "Sit down," I ordered, gesturing to the nearest chair. Elliot hesitated, glancing around as if searching for an escape. I leveled the gun at him, my hand steady. I said, "Sit down." Slowly, he lowered himself into the chair, his hands gripping the edges of the seat. The air was thick with tension, the kind that made every second feel like an eternity. I could hear the distant wail of sirens approaching, but they were still a few minutes away. Just enough time. I kept my gaze locked on Elliot as the room held its collective breath. Every eye was on us. Every phone was pointed in our direction. The whispers had ceased, replaced by a tense, oppressive silence. This was what I wanted: witnesses, proof, a moment of clarity for everyone to see Elliot for what he truly was. "You thrive on humiliation, don't you?" I said, my voice loud enough for the crowd to hear. "You target people like me, husbands, fathers. You go after their wives, destroy their families, and then walk away like it's nothing. But not tonight." Elliot's lips pressed into a thin line, his fear barely concealed under a veneer of defiance. "Look, I don't know what you think I've done, but this isn't the way to handle it." "Oh, it's exactly the way to handle it," I shot back. "You see, Elliot, people like you rely on the shadows. You operate quietly, discreetly. But here, in the open, with everyone watching, you can't hide." The sirens grew louder, but I ignored them. This moment wasn't about them. It was about me and the wreckage Elliot had left in his wake. I gestured toward the blonde woman seated nearby, her husband now standing protectively in front of her. "You see her?" I said, pointing with my free hand. "She's next on your list, isn't she? You've already decided she's vulnerable, that she'll fall for whatever lines you feed her. But not tonight." The blonde woman's husband, clearly shaken, glanced between me and Elliot, unsure of what to do. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice trembling. Elliot's mask cracked further, panic flickering across his face. "Don't listen to him," he said quickly. "He's making this up." "Am I?" I said, my tone sharp. "Do you really think this is some elaborate lie? Ask your wife. Ask her how many times Elliot's glanced her way tonight. Ask her what he said when you went to the bar." The man turned to his wife, his expression a mix of confusion and hurt. She opened her mouth to respond but faltered, her cheeks flushing with guilt. That was all the confirmation he needed. "You bastard," the husband muttered, stepping toward Elliot, his fists clenched. Hey, I interjected, holding up a hand. "Not yet. Let him squirm a little longer." Elliot shifted in his seat, his confidence eroding under the weight of the crowd's judgment. I could see it in his eyes, the realization that his usual tactics wouldn't save him this time. The sirens outside were deafening now, and moments later, the doors burst open. Uniformed officers poured into the room, their weapons drawn, shouting commands. I slowly raised my hands, keeping the Glock pointed downward as I stepped back from Elliot. "I'm the one you're looking for," I announced, my voice calm. "I'm unarmed now. The gun's on the table." The officers hesitated, scanning the room before one of them approached cautiously. He picked up the gun, inspecting it before motioning for another officer to handcuff me. I didn't resist as they secured my wrists, their grip firm, but not rough. Elliot, still seated, looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. The officers turned to him, their expressions hard. "Are you pressing charges?" one of them asked. Elliot hesitated, clearly weighing his options. If he pressed charges, the entire story would come out, the videos, the affairs, the lives he'd ruined. He shook his head. "No," he muttered. "Just get him out of here." A month later, I found myself standing in a courtroom, my lawyer beside me. The prosecutor painted me as a dangerous vigilante, someone who had taken the law into their own hands. I couldn't argue with that. I had. But my lawyer fought back, arguing for leniency. He presented evidence of Elliot's pattern of behavior, the dozens of families he'd destroyed, the testimonies of his victims. By the end of the trial, the jury was visibly conflicted. When the verdict came down, guilty, with a sentence of 5 to 8 years, I accepted it without complaint. I'd known from the start that there would be consequences for my actions, and I was prepared to face them. Prison was exactly as I'd expected, grim, monotonous, and full of men who had little to lose. But word of why I was there spread quickly, and to my surprise, it earned me a strange sort of respect. Inmates who had nothing in common with me would nod in acknowledgement as I passed, their silent approval a small comfort in an otherwise bleak existence. I kept my head down, avoided trouble, and counted the days until my parole hearings began. Every year, Elliot would show up, leaning heavily on his cane, his hatred for me written all over his face. And every year, his testimony ensured I stayed behind bars. In my 5th year, Elliot didn't show up. No cane, no smug expression, no venomous words. I didn't know why, and I didn't ask. Without him there, the board granted my parole, and I walked out of prison a free man. Walking out of the prison gates felt surreal. The air was crisp, the sun brighter than I remembered. Freedom tasted bittersweet. I had no family waiting for me, no home to return to. My ex-wife had remarried, and my kids, now teenagers, likely remembered me more as the man who was arrested than the father who once tucked them in at night. Still, there was one thing I knew I had to do: start over. The world wasn't going to hand me a second chance, but I was determined to create one. I secured a bed at a halfway house and began the slow process of piecing my life back together. 2 days after my release, I received a call from an unknown number. The man on the other end introduced himself as Leo, a small business owner who'd heard about my story. "I run a logistics company," he said. "I'm willing to give you a job, no questions asked. You'll need training, but if you're serious about rebuilding, I can help." Skeptical but desperate, I agreed. A meeting was arranged at a local diner, where Leo and his business partner, Alan, waited for me. They were older men, each with the weary look of people who had seen their share of hardship. But their smiles were warm, and their offer genuine. Over coffee, Leo explained why he had reached out. "You did what a lot of us only dreamed of doing," he said. "Alan and we've been in your shoes. Elliot destroyed our families, too." My breath caught. "You knew him?" Alan nodded grimly. "Our wives fell into his trap years ago. We lost everything, our marriages, our peace of mind. When we saw your story on the news, we couldn't look away. You had the courage to do what we couldn't." Their words hit me like a freight train. I'd thought my pain was singular, that my story was unique. But here were two men who understood exactly what I had been through. Leo and Alan didn't just offer me a job. They offered me a lifeline. They trained me in logistics, teaching me everything from inventory management to truck maintenance. The work was grueling, but it was honest, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had a purpose. In time, I found a small apartment through one of Alan's contacts. It wasn't much, just a single room with peeling wallpaper and a leaky faucet, but it was mine. For the first time since my arrest, I felt a flicker of hope. Months into my new job, I received a letter in the mail. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the signature at the bottom sent a chill down my spine. Elliot. The contents were cryptic, an invitation to meet at a local park. Against my better judgment, I went. When I arrived, I found him seated on a bench, his cane resting beside him. He looked older, more weathered, but his eyes still held that infuriating spark of arrogance. "What do you want?" I asked, keeping my distance. "I wanted to see you," he replied, his voice calm. "To understand why you did it." His question stunned me. "You don't get it, do you? You ruined lives, mine, Leo's, Alan's, dozens of others. And you think this is about understanding?" He leaned back, a smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth. "People like me don't change, you know. But people like you? You're fascinating. You think you're the hero of this story, but you're just as broken as the rest of us." Elliot's words echoed in my mind long after I left the park. I hated that he had a point, hated that his presence could still unnerve me. But his smugness had lit a fire in me, a determination to prove him wrong, to build a life that couldn't be touched by the likes of him. Weeks later, I learned through Leo that Elliot had taken his own life. The news was shocking, but I couldn't muster sadness. His death felt like the final chapter of a long and painful book. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. With Elliot gone, I found myself thinking more about my kids. I hadn't seen them in years, but Leo encouraged me to reach out. "They deserve to know you tried," he said. Writing the letter was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. I poured my heart into it, explaining everything. My mistakes, my regrets, my hope for a second chance. Weeks passed without a response, but then, one day, a letter arrived. The letter was from my son, Nathan. He was cautious, unsure if he wanted to meet, but his words held a glimmer of curiosity. I wrote back immediately, starting a correspondence that became the highlight of my days. Over time, Nathan opened up, and eventually, he agreed to meet. Seeing Nathan in person was overwhelming. He had grown so much, taller, more confident. But his eyes held the same warmth I remembered. We talked for hours, catching up on years we had lost. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Nathan and I continued meeting in the months that followed, slowly rebuilding a relationship I feared was lost forever. At first, our conversations were hesitant, guarded. He asked questions about my time in prison, about what led to that fateful night with Elliot. I answered honestly, even when it hurt, determined not to sugarcoat the truth. I hated you for a long time, he admitted one evening as we sat on a park bench. I didn't understand why you'd throw everything away. But now, I get it. You were protecting us, in a way. His words left me speechless. I had never thought of my actions as anything other than a reaction to my own pain. But hearing Nathan's perspective gave me hope that maybe, just maybe, I had done something right. Nathan eventually brought his twin sister, Natalie, into our meetings. Unlike her brother, she was more skeptical, her anger simmering just below the surface. Why now? She asked during our first meeting, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Why did it take you so long to reach out? Her question hit me like a punch to the gut, but I didn't shy away. Because I was scared, I admitted. Scared that you wouldn't want me in your life. Scared that I'd already done too much damage. But I'm here now, and I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. It wasn't an instant fix, but over time, Natalie began to soften. She saw the effort I was making, the sincerity in my words, and while our relationship was far from perfect, it was a start. One night, I found myself thinking about my ex-wife, Emily. I had avoided contacting her, respecting the boundaries she had set years ago, but my conversations with Nathan and Natalie had stirred memories I couldn't ignore. I wondered if she was happy, if she ever thought about the life we had built before everything fell apart. Leo, ever the pragmatist, offered his perspective over a late-night drink. You've made peace with Elliot, he said. Maybe it's time to make peace with her, too. It wasn't a simple decision, but after weeks of deliberation, I decided to write her a letter. I didn't ask for anything. No meetings, no reconciliation, just an acknowledgement of the mistakes we had both made and a wish for her happiness. To my surprise, Emily responded. Her letter was cautious but kind, filled with updates about her life and our children. She wrote about her new husband, who she described as patient and supportive, and about the challenges of co-parenting after our divorce. I won't pretend that what happened didn't hurt, she wrote. But I've seen the changes in Nathan and Natalie since they started talking to you. They're happier, more grounded. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. Her words were a balm I hadn't realized I needed. For the first time, I felt a sense of closure with Emily, a sense that while we could never go back to what we were, we had both found a way forward. With my relationships slowly mending, I began to think about the future. My work with Leo and Alan had given me stability, but I wanted something more. Inspired by the stories I had heard from other victims of people like Elliot, I decided to start a support group. It was a modest idea at first, just a handful of men and women gathering to share their experiences. But it quickly grew into something much larger. Within months, the group had expanded, drawing people from all walks of life who had been impacted by betrayal and loss. We offered resources, counseling, and most importantly, a sense of community. For the first time in years, I felt like I was making a real difference. The group's success didn't go unnoticed. Local media picked up on the story, and soon I was being invited to speak at events and conferences. It was surreal, standing in front of crowds and sharing my journey, but it was also incredibly fulfilling. I wasn't just helping others. I was helping myself, too. Through the group, I met people who had experienced pain far greater than mine. Their resilience inspired me, pushing me to keep going even when I felt overwhelmed. Each story reminded me that while I couldn't change the past, I could still create something meaningful in the present. Nathan and Natalie began attending some of the group's events, their presence a quiet show of support. Seeing them there, surrounded by people who understood our shared pain, filled me with a pride I couldn't put into words. One evening, after an especially moving session, Natalie approached me with tears in her eyes. I'm proud of you, Dad, she said softly. I don't think I ever said that before, but I am. Her words were a gift I hadn't expected, and they stayed with me long after the event ended. As the years passed, my life began to take on a sense of normalcy. The support group continued to grow, and my work with Leo and Alan flourished. I even started dating again, cautiously opening myself up to the possibility of love. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. Nathan and Natalie became fixtures in my life, their visits a source of constant joy. We weren't the family we had once been, but we were something new, something stronger. Looking back, I often thought about Elliot, not with anger, but with a strange sense of gratitude. His actions had nearly destroyed me, but they had also forced me to confront the darkest parts of myself. In doing so, I had found a strength I didn't know I possessed. The support group became my legacy, a testament to the power of resilience and the importance of community. Through it, I had turned my pain into something meaningful, something that could help others navigate their own struggles. On the 10th anniversary of my release from prison, I stood before a packed room at a conference, sharing my story for what felt like the 100th time. As I spoke, I saw Nathan and Natalie sitting in the front row, their faces filled with pride. Emily was there, too, her smile a quiet reminder of how far we had all come. When I finished, the crowd rose to their feet, their applause echoing through the room. I stepped back, letting the moment wash over me, and for the first time in years, I felt truly whole. The journey had been long, painful, and filled with countless challenges, but it had led me here, to a life rebuilt, relationships mended, and a purpose that gave everyday meaning. And in that moment, I knew I had finally found peace. Again, don't bother coming to this one, Liz said, her smile wavering like a lie caught mid-breath. The words hung between us, casual yet calculated, as if testing the strength of the air they traveled through. 3 days before the company party, that was when my world, perfectly framed like a portrait on the wall, began to crack. My name is Albert Brown. I'm 46 years old, a seasoned account manager for a thriving manufacturing firm. To anyone who asked, I had it all. A 25-year marriage to my high school sweetheart, Elizabeth, or Liz as everyone called her. A sprawling lakefront home near Arlington. A daughter, Maria, so ambitious she was already engaged to William, a young man from a family far wealthier than ours. But the truth of a perfect life is that its fractures are often invisible until they aren't. That night, as Liz dismissed my attendance with that polished smile, something about her struck me as off. Her words had no warmth, no real interest in my presence. Just a polite dismissal, as if to say, don't concern yourself with my world. For 25 years, I had trusted Liz like the sky trusts the horizon, bound together despite our differences. But in that moment, something small but sharp pierced through me. An instinct, a flicker of doubt, lit a spark in my chest. Still, I ignored it. After all, Liz was Liz, my partner, my confidant, the woman who once shared ramen noodles with me in a dingy college apartment and laughed as if it were a feast. But that Saturday night at the party was where it all unraveled. Liz had always been stunning, with blonde hair that refused to gray and piercing blue eyes that lit up a room. But that night, in a sleek black dress that hugged every curve, she wasn't just stunning, she was performing. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't for me. We arrived at the venue, a glittering banquet hall buzzing with energy, and the first thing I noticed was how everyone's gaze lingered on her. Liz always had a way of commanding attention, but tonight, the air was different. People weren't just admiring her. They were complicit. And then I saw him. The man was in his early 50s, his gray hair combed back with a precision that mirrored his arrogance. He exuded confidence, too much of it, like he belonged to a world where rules bent around his desires. His suit was tailored to perfection, and the smirk on his face sent a chill down my spine. He made a beeline for Liz, cutting through the crowd like a shark in still waters. Before I could even process what was happening, Liz turned toward him with a smile that wasn't hers, not the one I knew. This smile was warmer, more intimate, and it sliced through me like a blade. Albert, she said, her voice light, almost dismissive. This is Chad Smith, one of my sales reps. Chad extended his hand, and I took it out of politeness. His grip was firm, his smile overly friendly. I've heard so much about you, he said, though his eyes barely glanced at me. His attention was fixed on Liz, as if I were nothing more than an inconvenient shadow. Likewise, I lied. For the next hour, I watched. I didn't want to, but I couldn't help myself. Liz floated around the room, charming everyone with her effortless charisma. She always had a knack for making people feel special. But tonight, her attention kept drifting to one person. Chad. Every glance, every laugh shared between them, felt like a slap across my face. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I was overthinking, letting my paranoia twist harmless interactions into something sinister. But then came the dance floor. Liz loved to dance, and we had always been a good pair. I led, she followed. Tonight, though, as we swayed to the music, her movements felt stiff, distracted. Her eyes weren't on me. They were scanning the crowd. And when I turned her in a slow spin, I saw where her gaze landed. Chad stood at the edge of the dance floor, his arms crossed, his smirk infuriatingly smug. He wasn't just watching, he was waiting. When we returned to our table, I tried to shake off the unease. Liz excused herself to get another drink, and I watched her weave through the crowd, her black dress catching the light with every step. And then, as if pulled by some invisible force, Chad followed. They met at the bar, their conversation too quiet for anyone but them. I saw her lean in closer, her lips moving in words I couldn't hear. But I didn't need to hear them. Her body language, the slight tilt of her head, the way her hand brushed his arm, it all screamed of familiarity. And then I caught it. One word that changed everything. Darling. She said it softly, almost tenderly, and it echoed in my mind like a gunshot. My heart raced, my hands clenched into fists onto the table. Every instinct screamed at me to confront them, to march up to that bar and demand an explanation. But I stayed seated, frozen by the weight of realization. This wasn't a hunch. It wasn't paranoia. This was betrayal. The days that followed were a blur of suspicion and anger, each one worse than the last. Liz carried on as if nothing had changed, her smile as warm as ever, her touch just as familiar. But I couldn't shake the images from that night. The glances, the whispers, the word darling. I needed answers. Real answers. So, I did what any man would do when the foundation of his life begins to crack. I sought the truth. Hiring David Carter, a private investigator, was a decision born out of desperation. He came highly recommended, a no-nonsense professional with a reputation for discretion. I told him everything. The party, Chad, the moments that didn't add up. Find out if there's anything to find, I told him, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. David didn't waste time. Within days, he sent me the first set of photos. I stared at them in disbelief, my heart pounding in my chest. Liz and Chad, walking into a motel. Liz and Chad, kissing in the parking lot. Liz and Chad, smiling as if the world belonged to them. Each photo was a punch to the gut, each one chipping away at the woman I thought I knew. I wanted to confront her right then, to shove the evidence in her face and demand answers. But I held back. David was thorough, and I needed the full picture. The evidence piled up over the next few weeks. More photos, video recordings, even audio clips. It wasn't just a fling. It was a calculated, ongoing affair. They met during lunch breaks, after work, even on weekends. But the worst part? The recordings. Hearing Liz laugh about their office wife arrangement made my blood boil. Albert would never suspect, she said in one clip, her tone casual, dismissive. He's too busy with work to notice. That stung more than anything else. She thought I was a fool, a man too blind to see the truth right in front of him. But she underestimated me. By the time David handed me his final report, I knew one thing for certain. I wouldn't just confront her. I wouldn't just demand answers. I would make her regret ever underestimating me. The envelope sat heavy on the kitchen table the next morning, a silent accusation wrapped in manila. Liz hummed softly as she flipped pancakes on the stove, the smell of butter and syrup wafting through the air. It was an ordinary morning, a routine that had played out countless times in our 25 years together. Except this time, I wasn't the same man sitting at the table. Liz, I began, my voice calm, but laced with ice. You'd never betray me, right? She froze, her hand gripping the spatula mid-flip. Slowly, she turned to face me, her blue eyes wide with something that almost looked like guilt before she covered it with a practiced smile. Of course not, Albert. Why would you even ask that? I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I reached into the envelope and pulled out the first photo, sliding it across the table. Her smile faltered as she stared at the image. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "You tell me," I replied, sliding another photo across the table. And then another. With each one, her face drained of color, her composure cracking like a fragile mask. "Albert, I can explain." "Explain what?" My voice was calm, steady, but every word carried the weight of my fury. "That you've been sneaking around behind my back. That you've been lying to me for over a year. It's not what it looks like," she stammered, her hands trembling as she reached for the photos. "I don't love him. It's just physical. It doesn't mean anything." I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "It doesn't mean anything? You destroyed 25 years of marriage for something that doesn't mean anything." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't care. For the first time, her pain didn't matter to me. The woman standing before me wasn't my Liz. She was a stranger, a liar. She launched into a flurry of excuses, her voice desperate. She talked about loneliness, about how she felt neglected, about how she thought I wouldn't notice. Every word felt like another knife twisting in my gut. "Stop," I said, my voice cold. "I've heard enough." Liz looked at me, her tears falling freely now. "Albert, I made a mistake. Please, we can fix this. I still love you, but love didn't mean the same thing anymore. Not after what she'd done. You want to fix this?" I leaned in, my eyes locking onto hers. "Then start by packing your things. You're leaving." Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She stared at me as if I'd struck her, but I didn't flinch. For 25 years, I had given her everything, my trust, my loyalty, my love. And now I was taking it back. If confronting Liz had been painful, what came next was worse. Maria, my daughter, my pride and joy, called me the next day. Her voice was filled with concern, but not for me. "Dad," she began cautiously, "Mom told me you had a fight. What's going on?" I hesitated for a moment before telling her everything. Liz's affair, Chad, the evidence. I didn't hold back. Maria listened in silence, and for a brief moment, I thought she might understand. But her response shattered me. "Dad, it's not that big of a deal," she said, her tone dismissive. "People have affairs all the time. It's not the end of the world. Not a big deal." I repeated, incredulous. "Your mother betrayed me. She lied to me for over a year." Maria sighed, as if I were the one being unreasonable. "Look, I'm not saying it's okay, but maybe you're overreacting. Mom loves you. She just made a mistake." "A mistake?" My voice was rising, anger bubbling to the surface. "She destroyed our family, Maria. How is that just a mistake?" And then she said the words that would haunt me. "Maybe you should just let it go, Dad. It's not like you've been perfect either." I was speechless. My own daughter, the person I had sacrificed so much for, was defending Liz. The final blow came when Maria casually added, "Oh, by the way, Mom and I were talking, and we think Chad should come to the wedding. He's important to her." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "If Chad is at your wedding," I said, my voice icy, "then I won't be." "Dad, don't be ridiculous." "I'm serious, Maria. If he's there, I'm not." And with that, I hung up. Liz's betrayal was one thing. Maria's was another. But together, they lit a fire in me that refused to die. I wasn't just angry. I was determined. They thought they could walk all over me, that I would sit back and let them humiliate me, that I'd play the fool while they carried on. They were wrong. I started planning in secret, every step methodical and deliberate. Liz had no idea how much control I had over our finances. While she played house with Chad, I moved everything I could, our savings, our investments, into accounts she couldn't trace. I refinanced the house, took out loans, and left the debts in her name. The BMW she loved so much, I borrowed against it, leaving her to deal with the fallout. But that was just the beginning. Liz and Maria wanted to rebuild their lives without me. Fine. but I'd make sure they started from the ground up. Every night, I sat across from Liz at the dinner table, playing the part of a husband willing to move forward. She smiled, made small talk, and acted as if she'd won. She thought my confrontation had been the climax, the storm that passed. Little did she know, I was the eye of the hurricane. Over the next few weeks, I executed my plan with precision. I withdrew the maximum allowable funds from our shared accounts, transferring them to offshore accounts under names she would never recognize. Liz wasn't financially savvy. She left all the financial planning to me. That ignorance was now her downfall. Meanwhile, I handled our home. 15 years ago, we had purchased it outright, a fact Liz loved to brag about to her friends. What she didn't know was that I'd refinanced it multiple times over the years for investments she never asked about. I secured a new loan for $2 million, tying it solely to her name. Her beloved BMW? That was next. I took out a loan against the car, secured $40,000, and funneled it into my private account. By the time I was done, every major asset we owned was mortgaged or tied to debts she'd be responsible for. Liz didn't notice a thing, too caught up in her fantasy life with Chad to see the storm brewing on the horizon. Maria's wedding was supposed to be the culmination of everything she'd ever dreamed of, a grand affair with no expense spared. I'd initially agreed to fund the event, signing off on lavish decorations, a live band, and an open bar. But Maria's dismissal of my pain and her defense of Chad had soured everything. One morning, I made a call to the wedding planner. "Hi, this is Albert Brown," I said. "I won't be funding the wedding anymore. You'll need to discuss payment with Maria or her mother." There was a long pause on the other end. "Mr. Brown, the deposits." "Keep them," I said, cutting her off. "Consider it compensation for your trouble." I hung up, my chest tight with anger. If Maria wanted Chad at her wedding, she could let him foot the bill. I wasn't done. Maria's fiancé, William, was a decent young man from a respectable family. I decided he deserved to know the truth about what he was walking into. I called him, arranging a meeting at a nearby cafe. Over coffee, I laid everything out. The affair, Maria's casual dismissal of it, her insistence on having Chad at the wedding. I even played him the audio recordings of Maria saying, "It's not a big deal. Men cheat all the time." William's face darkened with every word. "Thank you for telling me," he said finally, his voice steady but pained. "I had no idea." 2 days later, Maria called me in tears. "William called off the wedding," she sobbed. "Why would you do this to me, Dad?" "You did this to yourself, Maria," I said, my voice cold. "You chose to side with your mother and her affair partner. Now live with the consequences." The first cracks in Liz's world appeared a week after I walked out. The loan against the house went through, and the bank wasted no time contacting her. Liz called me in a panic, but I didn't answer. Her second call came after the BMW payments started piling up. Then came the credit card bills, now maxed out from the wedding deposits and her lavish spending. Chad wasn't much help. His wife, armed with the evidence I had anonymously sent her, filed for divorce. She was a major shareholder in the advertising agency where Chad worked, and she used her influence to have him fired. Overnight, he went from a hotshot sales rep to a middle-aged man driving for a rideshare company. Liz's reputation crumbled. I forwarded evidence of the affair to her boss, along with transcripts of her mocking office policies and deadlines. The agency couldn't afford the scandal and let her go. Within 2 months, Liz and Maria were living in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in a rough part of town. From what I heard, Liz took a job as a waitress at a roadside diner, her once perfect nails chipped and her blonde hair dull. Maria, having lost her wealthy fiancé and the dream wedding, was working part-time at a coffee shop, her college tuition now her responsibility. I settled in Florida, far away from the wreckage I'd left behind. The sun was warm, the beaches endless, and the people didn't know me or my past. My finances were secure, tucked safely in offshore accounts, and I lived simply but comfortably. I bought a truck and a travel trailer, both in cash, and registered them under my cousin's name. Every so often, I'd hear whispers about Liz and Maria. They were struggling, barely making ends meet. Chad had vanished into obscurity, his life just as miserable as theirs. But I didn't feel pity. For 25 years, I had been the rock, the provider, the one who kept everything together. When they chose to betray me, they underestimated what I was capable of. Now, as I watched the waves crash against the shore, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. They had their choices, and I had mine. In the soft melody of a violin wafted through the dimly lit Italian restaurant, mingling with the faint clinking of glasses and hushed murmurs of other diners. Jake absent-mindedly traced the edge of his wine glass, his eyes on Lily, who sat across the table, unusually quiet. For as long as he could remember, this had been their spot, a place of solace, where they could reconnect amidst the chaos of life. But tonight something was off. Lily's eyes darted nervously around the room, her fingers fidgeting with the corner of her napkin. The smile that usually lit up her face seemed forced, the light in her gaze replaced with a flicker of hesitation. Jake's stomach churned. He knew her well enough to sense when she was holding back, but nothing could have prepared him for what came next. "I've been thinking," Lily began, her voice forcibly casual, though her hands betrayed her nerves as they twisted the silver ring she always wore. Jake leaned forward, his brow furrowing. "About what?" Lily hesitated, taking a deep breath as if gathering courage. Then, with the same nonchalance one might use to suggest a change in dinner plans, she said, "Maybe we should allow each other a free pass. Just one night to explore." The words hit Jake like a freight train. For a moment, he thought he'd misheard. He blinked at her, waiting for a smile or a laugh, something to indicate this was a joke. But Lily's expression remained serious, a flicker of excitement in her eyes as she gauged his reaction. "A free pass," he repeated, his voice low and steady, masking the storm of emotions raging inside him. "Yes," she said quickly, as if relieved the words were finally out. Just once, to see if we're missing out on anything. It's not about us, Jake. It's just curiosity." Jake's grip on his wine glass tightened, the cool surface pressing against his palm. The idea of Lily, his Lily, being with someone else was unfathomable. And the casual way she suggested it, as if it were no more consequential than trying a new hobby, left him speechless. "You mean," he began carefully, "you want to sleep with someone else?" "Not permanently," Lily clarified, her tone light. "Just once. To spice things up." Spice things up. The phrase twisted in Jake's mind like a knife. He'd spent years building a life with her, pouring his heart and soul into their relationship. And now, she wanted to throw it all away for a fleeting thrill. He forced himself to smile, though it felt more like a grimace. "If that's what you want, Lily, we'll talk about it later." Her face lit up with relief, mistaking his composure for agreement. "I think it'll be good for us," she said, her tone brightening. Jake barely registered her words. He was too busy battling the tidal wave of anger, betrayal, and heartbreak threatening to consume him. For the rest of the meal, he maintained a facade of calm, responding to her chatter with nods and polite murmurs. But inside, he was unraveling. The ride home from the restaurant was a strained silence, broken only by the faint hum of the engine. Jake's hands gripped the steering wheel, so tightly his knuckles turned white, but his face betrayed none of the turmoil within. Lily hummed softly beside him, as though the evening had been a success. She didn't seem to notice the storm brewing in the man she called her husband. Jake glanced at her out of the corner of his eye. How could she sit there so calmly, so carelessly, after what she had just suggested? As they pulled into their driveway, Jake killed the engine but made no move to get out. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. He had to stay calm, had to think clearly. Acting in anger would give her the upper hand, and he wouldn't let that happen. "You coming?" Lily asked brightly as she stepped out of the car. Jake nodded silently, following her inside. The house felt colder than usual, the familiar warmth replaced by an oppressive heaviness. He watched Lily kick off her heels and head to the kitchen, her carefree demeanor like salt in an open wound. "I'm going to bed," he muttered, his voice devoid of emotion. Lily paused, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. "You okay?" Jake forced a smile. "Just tired. Long day." She hesitated, then shrugged. "All right. I'll be up soon." Jake lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The weight of her words pressed down on him, each syllable replaying in his mind like a broken record. A free pass. How could she reduce their marriage to something so trivial? His phone buzzed on the nightstand, pulling him from his thoughts. It was Max, his oldest friend, who had always been a steady presence in his life. "You good?" The text read. Jake stared at the screen, his fingers hovering over the keyboard before he typed a response. "Not really. Can I call?" The phone rang almost immediately. "What's up?" Max's voice was laced with concern. Jake took a deep breath, his words spilling out in a rush. He recounted everything. The dinner, Lily's suggestion, the hollow way she'd looked at him as if their years together meant nothing. When he finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Jake," Max finally said, his tone firm, "this isn't on you. This is about her. She's the one who's lost respect for what you've built together. But listen to me, you have to stay calm. Don't let this break you. If you want to give her that freedom, fine, but do it on your terms." Jake nodded, even though Max couldn't see him. "You're right. I won't act out of anger. But I can't let this slide, either." "Good. Whatever you need, I'm here." After hanging up, Jake felt a strange sense of clarity. He couldn't control Lily's actions, but he could control his response. He wasn't just going to sit back and let her walk all over him. No, he was going to show her exactly what it meant to take him for granted. The days that followed were eerily normal. Lily seemed convinced that Jake had accepted her idea, and her demeanor shifted. She was more affectionate, more attentive, as if compensating for her guilt, or perhaps celebrating her newfound freedom. Jake played along, masking his resentment with a calm, detached demeanor. He watched her closely, analyzing every word, every movement. She was hiding something. He could feel it. One evening, as they sat on the couch watching a movie, Jake decided to test the waters. "So," he said casually, "have you thought about who you'd use your free pass on?" Lily froze for a fraction of a second, her reaction so brief it might have gone unnoticed by anyone else. But Jake caught it. Her laugh was light, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Of course not, Jake. It's not like I have anyone in mind. I just thought we both needed something fresh." "Fresh," Jake repeated, the word bitter on his tongue. He forced a smile. "Makes sense." Lily relaxed, seemingly reassured by his response. But Jake's mind was already racing. He didn't believe her for a second. Behind the scenes, he began laying the groundwork. He met with a lawyer discreetly, ensuring his assets were protected and preparing for the possibility of separation. He sorted through their financial documents, making copies of everything important. Quietly, he began moving some of his belongings to Max's apartment under the guise of spring cleaning. Every step he took was calculated, methodical. He wasn't just preparing for the fallout. He was planning his next move. The clock on the wall ticked louder than usual, each second dragging like an eternity. Jake sat in the living room, feigning interest in the sports channel, though his mind was elsewhere. Lily had been buzzing with excitement all day, her plans for the evening carefully disguised as a girls' night out. "You don't mind, do you?" she had asked earlier, her tone almost too casual. "Not at all," Jake had replied, his expression unreadable. But as she descended the stairs now, dressed in a way she hadn't for him in years, Jake's stomach churned. Her fitted black dress hugged her curves, the soft scent of her perfume filling the room like an unwelcome intruder. "Wow," he said, his tone neutral. "You look ready for a good time." Lily smiled, her cheeks flushing slightly. "Thanks. Don't wait up, okay? It might get late." Jake's jaw tightened, but he forced a small smile. "Have fun." As the door closed behind her, the house fell into a heavy silence. Jake sat motionless, staring at the blank TV screen. He had expected this moment, prepared for it even, but the pain was sharper than he had anticipated. He poured himself a drink, the amber liquid swirling in the glass as he tried to steady his thoughts. Hours passed, each one heavier than the last. He imagined her out there laughing, dancing, maybe even no. He pushed the thought away, but it clung to him like a shadow. At 2 a.m., the sound of the front door opening snapped him out of his daze. He stayed seated as Lily entered, her heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor. Her makeup was slightly smudged, her hair disheveled in a way that set Jake's teeth on edge. "Hey," she said, her voice light but tinged with an awkwardness she couldn't quite mask. Jake glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "You're back late?" "It was fun," she replied, avoiding his gaze. Just girl stuff?" Jake nodded, standing slowly. "I hope you got what you wanted out of it." Lily froze, her smile faltering. "What do you mean?" "Nothing," Jake said, brushing past her. "Good night, Lily." Her eyes lingered on him, a flicker of uncertainty in her expression. But Jake didn't look back. The next morning, the air between them was heavy. Lily seemed nervous, her cheerful facade cracking under the weight of Jake's silence. Over breakfast, he decided it was time to confront her. "So," he began, his tone deceptively light, "did you enjoy your free pass?" Lily nearly choked on her coffee. "Jake!" "No, really," he continued, leaning back in his chair. "Was it everything you hoped for?" "It wasn't like that," she stammered, her cheeks flushing. "It was just one night. It doesn't mean anything." Jake's calm exterior began to crack, his voice dropping to a dangerous low. "Doesn't mean anything? You tore apart our marriage for a cheap thrill, and you think it doesn't mean anything?" Lily's eyes widened, her mouth opening and closing as she struggled to find words. I thought it could bring us closer. I didn't mean—" "You didn't mean to betray me?" Jake snapped, standing abruptly. "Because that's what you did, Lily. You took everything we built and threw it away." Her voice broke as she reached for him. "Jake, please. I was wrong. It didn't mean anything. I swear." Jake stepped back, his gaze cold. "You wanted freedom. You got it. And now, so will I." Lily's face crumpled, but Jake didn't stay to watch her tears. He walked out of the house, the door slamming behind him. Jake's withdrawal was deliberate and thorough. He packed his belongings over the next few days, moving into Max's apartment while Lily watched helplessly. Her attempts to bridge the growing chasm between them were met with icy silence. "Jake, please," she begged one evening, tears streaming down her face. "We can fix this. Just tell me how to make it right." "You can't," Jake replied flatly, not even looking at her. Lily's desperate apologies only fueled his resolve. Every tear, every plea was a reminder of how easily she had dismissed their bond for her selfish whims. Meanwhile, Jake began his subtle campaign. He contacted mutual friends, dropping vague but suggestive comments about moving forward and finding someone who valued loyalty. The rumors spread like wildfire, eventually reaching Lily. The house felt emptier with each passing day. Jake's absence was tangible, an oppressive void that seemed to grow with every box he took to Max's apartment. Lily sat alone in the living room, staring at her phone, willing him to call, text, anything. But her screen remained dark. When she ventured out to meet friends, their smiles seemed forced, their words too carefully chosen. Lily picked up on the subtle shift in their behavior, the knowing glances exchanged when she wasn't looking. Jake's quiet campaign was working. One evening, she overheard a whispered conversation at a mutual friend's party. "I heard Jake's moving on," one voice said. And honestly, who could blame him? Lily's stomach dropped. She approached the group, forcing a laugh to mask her growing panic. "What's this about Jake?" The women exchanged awkward glances before one of them spoke. "Oh, nothing serious. Just rumors." Lily's forced smile wavered. "What kind of rumors?" Her friend hesitated, then sighed. "That he's seeing someone." "Honestly, Lily, we're all surprised he lasted this long. He deserved better." The words stung more than she expected. She left the party early, her mind racing. Was it true? Was Jake really seeing someone else? The thought clawed at her, growing into a gnawing obsession. Jake watched the fallout unfold from a distance, every piece of his plan clicking into place. The whispers, the rumors, the carefully planted seeds of doubt. All of it was leading Lily exactly where he wanted her. His next move was calculated. One evening, he posted a cryptic message on social media, grateful to be moving forward with someone who values loyalty and trust. Excited for what's ahead. The post was deliberately vague, but its impact was immediate. Within minutes, his inbox was flooded with messages from friends, acquaintances, and even strangers. But the one message he was waiting for didn't come until hours later. Lily's name lit up his phone screen. He let it ring. Then it rang again. And again. Finally, he picked up, his tone cool and detached. "What is it, Lily?" "Jake," she began, her voice trembling. "I saw your post. Is it true? Are you seeing someone?" Jake paused, letting the silence stretch long enough to make her squirm. "What does it matter to you?" "It matters because I still love you," she blurted out, her words spilling over each other. "I know I made a mistake, Jake. I know I hurt you. But we can fix this. Please, tell me it's not true." Jake's lips curled into a bitter smile. "You want a freedom, Lily? I'm just following your lead." Her sobs echoed through the phone, but Jake remained impassive. "Good night, Lily," he said, hanging up without another word. Lily's desperation deepened in the weeks that followed. She left tearful voicemails, poured her heart into long texts, and even showed up unannounced at Max's apartment. Jake ignored her at every turn. But he wasn't done yet. He had one last move to make, one that would ensure Lily truly understood the gravity of her actions. Jake contacted a real estate agent to list their house, the very home they had built together. It was the final symbol of their life as a couple, and dismantling it was a deliberate choice. He left the papers on the kitchen counter one evening, knowing Lily would see them when she came by to pick up her mail. The phone call came an hour later. "Jake, what is this?" she demanded, her voice thick with panic. "It's a sale agreement," Jake replied evenly. "We don't need the house anymore." "But it's our home," Lily cried. "It was," Jake said coldly. "But that ended the night you decided we needed a free pass." Jake chose the same Italian restaurant for their final confrontation, the place where it had all begun. It was poetic, in a way, to end things where the cracks in their marriage had first surfaced. When Lily arrived, she looked like a shadow of the woman she had been. Her face was pale, her eyes red and swollen from sleepless nights. She slid into the seat across from Jake, her hands trembling as she reached for the water glass. "Jake," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please, don't do this. I know I messed up. I thought having that freedom would make me feel alive again. But I was wrong. I lost sight of what we had, and I'll never find it again." Jake studied her for a long moment, his face unreadable. "Lily," he said finally, "when you asked me for that free pass, you didn't just ask for one night. You took the heart of our marriage and traded it for a fleeting thrill. You betrayed everything we built together." Tears streamed down her face as she reached for his hand. "I'll do anything, Jake. Please, just give me one more chance." But Jake shook his head, his expression resolute. "You already had your chance, Lily. You wanted a free pass, and now you have it. A free pass to move on without me." He stood, leaving her sitting alone at the table, her sobs echoing in the otherwise quiet restaurant. As Jake stepped into the cool night air, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The pain of Lily's betrayal was still there, but it was no longer a burden. He had taken back control, reclaiming his dignity and his future. For the first time in weeks, Jake felt something unfamiliar yet welcome: peace.